7 years. That's how long it had been since I last received flowers on Mother's Day. Not even a card. Not even a phone call that started with warmth. Just quick texts, one-word replies. And each year I told myself it didn't matter. But this morning, as the sun spilled across my empty kitchen, I found myself pulling out an old cardigan. It was the one Brendan gave me when he was 17. Forest green, a little worn at the cuffs, but still soft. I ironed it slowly as if smoothing out the years between us. Maybe, just maybe, he'd remember. The house was quiet when I woke up. Too quiet, really. No dogs barking next door, no garbage truck groaning up the street, just the tick of the kitchen clock and the hum of the fridge. It was Mother's Day, but it might as well have been any other Sunday. I made my coffee the same way I always did, black, one sugar. I sipped it slowly, standing by the window, watching the neighbours' wind chimes dance in the early breeze. There was something about the stillness of mornings like this that made old memories louder. I walked into the hallway closet and reached for the green sweater. Brendan had given it to me the summer before he left for college. He was only 17 then, but he'd saved up from his summer job at the bookstore. He even wrapped it. Told me it reminded him of the woods we used to walk through near Aunt Marie's cabin. He remembered every detail back then, every little thing. I held the sweater to my chest for a moment, before setting it gently on the ironing board. As the steam rose, I remembered how proud he was when I first put it on, how he had smiled that teenage smile he never showed anyone else. These days, that smile felt like it belonged to another lifetime. I wasn't bitter. Not really. Just tired. There's a specific ache that comes from loving someone who forgets how to love you back. And yet here I was, pressing the sweater smooth just in case today was different. Around 9, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Brendan. Just 4 words. Car will pick you. No punctuation. No Happy Mother's Day. No, see you soon, Mum. But still, he remembered. Or Catalina reminded him. Either way, I told myself it counted. I looked at myself in the hallway mirror. The green cardigan hugged my shoulders like an old promise. I smoothed down the sleeves, put on a little lipstick. I told myself this year would be better. This year, maybe he'd see me. Maybe you've done that, too. Held on to something small. A ritual. A gesture because deep down, you're still hoping they'll come back to the version of themselves who once looked at you with love. Let's see where that hope takes us. The rideshare arrived 5 minutes early. The driver was polite, didn't ask questions, just nodded when I told him the address. Brendan and Catalina had moved into that modern townhouse last fall. I'd only been there once since. When we pulled up, the front yard looked polished. Fresh flowers lined the walkway, and balloons floated near the porch railing. I stepped out, holding the little gift bag I had brought. Inside was a framed photo of Brendan as a toddler sitting on my lap with cake on his cheeks. I had written a short note, nothing dramatic, just a memory. The door was slightly ajar. I knocked softly before walking in. No one greeted me. The house was full of chatter music playing low in the background. Laughter echoed from the kitchen. I followed the sound, trying to stay out of the way. Catalina appeared first. She was wearing a striking red dress, high heels, makeup done to perfection. She saw me and smiled, not warmly, not coldly, just politely. "Oh, you're here. Come in." Mum's already in the living room. She meant her mother, of course. I nodded and stepped further in. I saw Brendan by the fireplace laughing with Catalina's brother. He looked relaxed, happy. He hadn't noticed me yet. Someone pointed me toward the kitchen island, where a row of high bar stools lined up next to the sink. That was where my place card sat, Marjorie, folded neatly placed beside a plastic cup and a napkin. I took the seat. From where I sat, I could see the trash can lid cracked open and an empty wine bottle resting on top. Then came the gift giving. Catalina's mother opened a white velvet box and gasped. A platinum necklace glimmering under the kitchen lights. The room clapped, cheered. Brendan leaned in and said something to his mother-in-law, who smiled like she had won a prize. Next came an envelope. She opened it slowly. It was a travel voucher. Italy. 2 weeks. I looked down at my lap, fingers clutching the paper napkin. Finally, Brendan walked toward me. He handed me a small gift bag. Inside was a $20 gift card to a local coffee shop and a pink keychain shaped like a heart. It read, "Best Grandma." I smiled. It was the polite thing to do. Then he turned back toward Catalina. Someone asked for group photos. I wasn't in any of them. The music got louder. I stayed seated for a while longer, my feet dangling slightly off the bar stool. No one came back to talk. I finished my plastic cup of lemonade, folded the napkin carefully, and placed it on the counter. The dishwasher beeped behind me. By the time Brendan walked me to the front door, most of the other guests were still chatting and drinking wine. He didn't offer to call another ride, just said they had friends coming over and needed the space. His voice was even. No emotion. No explanation. Catalina had already disappeared upstairs. I stepped outside into the early evening chill. The sun had dipped below the trees, casting a soft orange across the driveway. I waited for the rideshare in silence, holding the little paper bag with the coffee card and the keychain still inside. It felt almost ridiculous to take it with me, but leaving it behind would have been louder than I was willing to be. When the car pulled up, I slid into the back seat and fastened my belt. The driver gave me a nod through the rearview mirror, then turned up the radio just a notch, like he knew I didn't want to talk. I appreciated that. As we drove through the quiet streets, I stared out the window and saw myself reflected in the glass. My outline blurred slightly by the motion, and the passing lights looked like a stranger. A woman shaped by time and loss and quiet and folded inward. I traced the shape of my reflection's jaw with my eyes, remembering a version of me from years ago. The woman who used to sing in the kitchen while Brendan played with his dinosaurs under the table. The woman who stayed up late sewing patches on his jeans when he had fallen at recess. Now I was just a guest who didn't fit into the family photo. When I got home, I left my coat on, walked into the kitchen, and set the little gift bag down on the counter. The house was still and dark. I didn't bother turning on the lights. I reached into the fridge and pulled out 2 boiled eggs I had made the night before. I placed them gently into a small white bowl and sat down at the table. The silence was thick. I didn't touch the eggs. The fork stayed clean. I stared at the chair across from me as if someone were supposed to be sitting there, as if this was all just a mistake, and Brendan would knock on the door any second, saying he had meant something else, that he had noticed the empty spot at the bar stool, that he had remembered the sweater I wore today, the one he gave me when he was 17. But no one knocked. Outside, a car passed slowly, its headlights casting long beams across the dining room wall. I looked around at my little house. The framed photo of Brendan in his cap and gown still sat on the mantel. I had dusted it that morning. Next to it was the ceramic cardinal he made in 3rd grade art class, lopsided and painted bright red. Eventually I stood up, put the bowl back into the fridge, untouched, and walked to the bedroom. I undressed quietly, folded the sweater carefully, and placed it back in the drawer. Then I turned out the light. I was walking back from the pharmacy that morning. I had just picked up a small bag of medication, nothing serious, just blood pressure pills I'd taken for years. The spring sun was warm on my shoulders, and for a second I thought about walking the long way home past the lake. But something pulled me back. Maybe it was just habit, or maybe it was something else entirely. As I reached the lobby of Brendan's building, I realized I had forgotten my scarf in his guest bathroom the day before. I didn't want to make a scene, so I decided to quietly check if he or Catalina was home. I stepped into the hallway carpet soft beneath my feet and headed to their door. Just as I got close, I heard Catalina's voice, low but clear, floating through the half-open window next to their kitchen. I paused, not because I meant to eavesdrop, but because something in her tone made me freeze. She said Brendan needs to sign those papers today. We can't risk delays, especially with her still in the picture. I held my breath. There was a pause, then her voice again. She won't be around much longer. He keeps saying she's frail anyway. It'll all settle itself before summer if we're lucky. Her words hit me like cold water. I backed away from the window scarf, forgotten heart thudding in my chest. I turned the corner and leaned against the hallway wall, struggling to breathe. My hands were shaking. In all my years as a nurse, I'd heard cruel things said behind closed doors. I'd seen family turn their backs on loved ones when the money ran out or the patients wore thin. But never once did I think those same kinds of betrayals would come from my own blood. I made my way out of the building and sat at the bus stop, staring at the road. The voices still echoed in my ears, the way Catalina said it, the certainty in her tone. It wasn't a slip of frustration or a moment of heat. It was a plan. A part of me wanted to tell myself I had misunderstood. Maybe she was talking about something else. But deep down, I knew. I knew the way you know when someone you love stops looking you in the eye, when the silence at dinner becomes more than silence, when your name starts vanishing from plans, decisions, and conversations. That evening, I sat on my couch, holding the edge of the knitted throw I used to keep on Brendan's bed when he was a teenager. My mind kept circling back to her words. Papers. Frail. Not around much longer. I thought about the time my husband and I first bought the condo, the way we'd scrimped and saved, how we never missed a mortgage payment, how I had double shifted so Brendan could go to college without loans, the house, the account, the little things, they were all in our names. I had always assumed everything was still intact, but now I wasn't sure of anything anymore. I went to my bedroom, opened the drawer in my nightstand, and pulled out a small metal tin I hadn't touched in years. It was filled with old keys, copies of documents, my husband's handwritten notes. My hands hovered over it. Not tonight, but soon. They thought I would fade quietly, that I was too soft, too old, too tired. Maybe I had been. Maybe I still was. But something had shifted. Something had cracked open, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel confused. I felt focused, not angry, just focused. I didn't sleep that night. My body lay still, but my mind kept turning over everything Catalina had said. Her voice, casual and calm, kept looping in my ears like a record stuck on the most dangerous line. I knew something was off. I just didn't know how deep the rot had gone. By early morning, the sky outside had barely changed colours when I slipped into my slippers and made my way to the hall closet. Hidden behind an old winter coat and a stack of outdated tax folders, I reached for the metal box my husband had insisted we keep locked and out of sight. The box was cold, heavy. I hadn't opened it in nearly a decade. I carried it to the kitchen table. For a long moment, I just stared at it. I thought about the day we first filled it. My husband in his flannel shirt glasses slipping down his nose, carefully placing the house deed next to the life insurance policy. Everything we worked for stored in that tin, sealed with a layer of dust and trust. I opened it slowly. There it was. The original deed to the condo, a copy of our marriage license, old insurance documents, the will we had drafted back in 2005 when Brendan was still in college. I flipped through, scanning each sheet with trembling hands, and then I saw it. A document I didn't recognize. It was a power of attorney form, supposedly granting Brendan full control over all my financial decisions and property. The signature looked like mine, but something about it felt off. My name was spelled correctly, but the flow was wrong, like someone had practiced it just enough to make it pass. I checked the date. Only 6 months ago. The breath caught in my throat. I never signed this. Not knowingly. And certainly not in front of a notary, which this version conveniently lacked. Next to it was a second document that made my blood run cold. It listed Brendan as the sole controller of a trust account tied to the condo. I flipped back to older paperwork and confirmed what I feared. That account had always been in both our names, my husband's and mine. There was no mention of Brendan. Not back then. I sat back in the chair. The morning light crept across the table, illuminating the thin papers like a spotlight on betrayal. This wasn't just negligence. This was orchestrated. Quiet, careful, deliberate. My hands shook, but I kept going. At the bottom of the box, I found the last handwritten letter my husband had left for me, the one he'd slipped inside our will years ago. His words, written in blue ink, reminded me to protect what we built. For Brendan, for our family, but never at the cost of my dignity. I folded the letter carefully and set it aside. Then I got up, opened the kitchen drawer, and took out a notepad. I started writing down everything I found. Names, dates, details, every small thing that didn't sit right. My pen moved with purpose, line after line, filling up faster than I could think. They thought I would never check, that I wouldn't remember where we kept the documents, that I was just an old woman who forgot her place in a world that moved faster than her bones. They were wrong. That afternoon, I called the only person I knew I could trust outside the family, an old colleague from the hospital. She had retired just before me, but her mind was still sharp as ever. She had once told me half-jokingly that if I ever suspected funny business with legal documents, she'd connect me with the right people. That call would come tomorrow. Tonight I just sat there, papers spread across my kitchen table, surrounded by the echoes of a life I thought was still mine. But I wasn't angry. Not yet. Just awake. Fully, painfully awake. By sunrise, I was back at the table, surrounded by the same evidence. I hadn't slept. The coffee in my mug was cold, untouched. For most of my life, my instincts were what kept people alive. I had read faces, spotted signs before they turned into symptoms, and now those instincts were flaring again. Only this time, the patient was me. I started reviewing everything, not just with a mother's grief, but with a nurse's method. I looked at the names, the missing stamps, the changed titles, and the dates that didn't add up. One thing was clear: I had been systematically erased. The monthly gas bill used to come in my name. Now it came to Brendan. The property tax statement for the condo no longer listed me as the primary contact. Even my own healthcare directive had a new custodian signature. I felt like I had slipped into a life where I still lived in my body, but someone else was holding the keys. I knew who could help. Her name was Judy Marks. She had been a hospital administrator back in my days at Fairhill Memorial. Judy was the one person I trusted with both compassion and logic. She had worked on patient rights cases, elder care law, and knew how to navigate red tape like a sailor reads waves. I called her from the landline. My voice barely cracked above a whisper. But she heard everything. I told her what I found. I described the power of attorney document with no witness, no notary seal, and my shaky signature. I told her about the trust account papers with Brendan's name, but no mention of me. I told her how Catalina's voice had dropped the word transfer like it was a light grocery item. Judy didn't say much at first. Then she gave me a name. A woman named Sheila Gant, a lawyer who handled estate fraud and elder protection. Judy said she'd seen her reverse fraudulent transfers before, quietly, cleanly, without dragging anyone through the mud. I hung up and stared at the wall for a long time. My house felt unfamiliar. Every chair, every plate, even the coat hook by the door. Everything looked the same, but didn't feel like mine anymore. And I knew exactly why. Because it wasn't just my name they were trying to take away. They were taking away my proof of existence. I grabbed my purse, placed the documents in a large manila envelope, and drove to the nearest print shop. I made 5 copies of everything. Then I drove straight to Sheila's office. It was a small building just past the train tracks with a mailbox covered in ivy. Her assistant greeted me kindly. I handed over the envelope and filled out a short intake form. I kept it brief. No emotional declarations, just facts. Former nurse, retired, suspicious documents, power of attorney alteration, property and account discrepancies. By the time I got back home, I felt both heavier and clearer. I didn't know how long it would take or what the end would look like. But I had taken a step, not for revenge, not even to get everything back, but to know the truth. Because somewhere along the way, Brendan and Catalina had stopped treating me like a person, and I had started to believe it. But now the nurse in me had woken up, and she was paying attention. The hallway outside my apartment always carried the smell of old carpet and yesterday's soup. I had passed by my neighbour, Mrs. Russo, hundreds of times over the years. We had shared a handful of words, maybe a few nods, and once a slice of lemon pound cake when her daughter came to visit. But that morning, as I locked my door to go pick up another set of legal documents from Sheila's office, her door creaked open. She was standing there in her housecoat and slippers, holding a mug that said, "World's okayest grandma." Her eyes studied me closely. She said she had seen Brendan the week before, not just passing through. She said he had been carrying a stack of papers pacing the hallway and stopped by the copy room at the end of the corridor. She said Catalina had come by twice on different afternoons, with what looked like file folders and a large zip drive. Then she looked me in the eyes and said something that tightened the air around us. She said she had overheard Brendan telling Catalina right outside her door that as long as I signed the last piece of paper, everything else would fall into place. That was 3 weeks ago, right before the Mother's Day invitation came. Mrs. Russo had kept quiet because, in her words, it wasn't her business. But after seeing how pale I looked lately, how hollow my eyes had gotten, she said she felt like she had to say something. She had a brother who lost his house to a scheme just like this one. She didn't want me to be another one. I invited her in. We sat at my tiny kitchen table, and I laid out the copies of the documents I had. I showed her the fake signature, the forged authorization, the missing witness fields. She looked them over slowly. Her hand trembled when she picked up the forged power of attorney. Then she said one thing that stopped my breath. She had heard Catalina call a man named Denny on speakerphone in the hallway. She remembered, because the name was strange. Catalina had said she would deliver the revised copy and make sure the old woman didn't even realize what she was signing. That was the missing link. She helped me write down everything she remembered with dates and approximate times. We signed and dated it together. Then she offered to walk with me to Sheila's office if I needed someone to come forward later. It wasn't much, maybe. Just the testimony of an elderly woman with sharp eyes and a better memory than people gave her credit for. But for me, it was the first time I didn't feel entirely alone in this. That evening, I lit a candle at the table. Not for prayer, just for clarity. The flame flickered against the stack of papers on the counter. It was no longer just about documents and fraud. It was about how quietly trust can be traded for silence, how family can fold into shadow, and how even the most invisible lives still leave traces. That night, I opened my notebook and began to write down every interaction I could remember over the last 6 months. I drew arrows, labeled details. I created a timeline of dinners, calls, bank statements, and dates. Brendan stopped replying to my messages because I knew now what I was dealing with. I wasn't just someone being left behind, I was being erased, and I was done letting that happen quietly. 2 days after Mrs. Russo shared what she knew, I sat across from Sheila again. The documents were laid out on her desk, her fingers gliding over each page like a surgeon while preparing for an operation. The office was quiet, save for the ticking wall clock and the occasional rustle of legal paper. She had requested more time to verify the changes to the power of attorney and other property transfers. That morning, she called me in early. She leaned in and said the original document had without a doubt been tampered with. The signatures were scanned from a previous file. The notary stamp wasn't registered with the state's system. Even more disturbing, several assets under my name had been used as collateral in recent months. I asked her what that meant. She said the condo I bought with my late husband's pension was tied to a new business loan. Brendan had submitted paperwork listing himself as the managing executor. Catalina's name didn't appear on the official filings, but her maiden name showed up on one of the background documents listed as a silent partner. They were opening a real estate firm. Offices already leased, branding approved, promotional website in the works. And I was the invisible investor footing the bill. I sat there stunned. Sheila pulled out a few printouts showing bank statements transfers and property liens, all showing up in the last 6 months. Things had moved fast, quiet, behind my back, using a forged power of attorney and a series of phone calls no one thought I'd trace. She handed me a highlighter. Together, we marked every unusual entry and red flag, one by one, page after page. My hands were steady, but I could feel a sharp ringing in my ears, the kind that comes when your mind wants to scream, but your body stays polite. I remembered when Brendan used to help me balance my checkbook. I trusted him. I never thought to question how my mail was being redirected, or how certain bills just stopped arriving. Until now. Sheila said we had enough to file a preliminary injunction, but she wanted to go further. She suggested we initiate a full trust review. She suspected this wasn't just about the condo. There could be life insurance, shared accounts, or retirement plans tied up in all of this. She asked for permission to contact the state licensing office and subpoena recent filings linked to Brendan's business registration. I gave her everything she needed. I left the office that afternoon carrying a folder thick with proof and a heart heavier than I expected. Not just from betrayal, but from how easy it had been to erase me on paper. Walking past the park near the courthouse, I saw a little boy flying a red kite. His mother stood nearby, clapping. For a second, I remembered Brendan at that age, the way his cheeks puffed when he concentrated, the small gap in his front teeth, the first time he wrote me a card and signed it with a heart. Those memories used to make me smile. Now they only reminded me how far someone can drift and still carry your blood. By nightfall, I placed all the documents in my old Hope chest right next to the baby book I'd kept since Brendan was born. That night, I did not sleep. I planned. The next move wouldn't be tears. It would be action. I called Brendan the next morning. My voice stayed steady. Maybe too steady. I told him I wanted to meet. Not at the house, not at the firm. Somewhere neutral. I picked the old cafe across from the park, the one he used to beg me to take him to when he was little. Back then, he only wanted hot chocolate with extra whipped cream. Now I wasn't offering sweetness. I arrived early, sat at the booth near the window. I didn't order anything, just placed 2 folders on the table in front of me neatly stacked. One was navy blue, the other manila. One held the truth, the other the lie. Brendan walked in late, phone in hand, still typing something. He wore that usual half smile that said he was already prepared to charm his way through whatever this was. He slid into the seat across from me like it was just another casual lunch. I didn't say much. He asked about my health, said I looked well. I nodded, let the silence grow. Then I said I had spoken with someone from the trust and estate office. That caught his attention. He blinked, just once, then straightened. I told him the review had uncovered some unexpected documents, and that we would be filing an official complaint about them, that the power of attorney he had used was invalid, that the assets he had moved were still mine. His smile didn't fade, but his fingers twitched under the table. He started explaining. Said Catalina had been eager. Said they had plans, yes, but nothing final. That no money had been taken. Not really. It was all theoretical. Intentions. Projections. I opened the Navy folder. Inside, the authentic power of attorney. Properly signed. Properly dated. Then I opened the Manila one. Inside, the forgery. The scanned signature. The fake notary. Brendan stopped talking. He looked at the pages like he'd never seen them before. But I knew the look in his eyes. It wasn't confusion. It was calculation. The silence between us stretched long. Then finally he leaned back, exhaled, and said, Catalina must have misunderstood. That it was her handwriting, not his. I let that hang in the air. I didn't interrupt. I didn't argue. I just watched him realize this wasn't going to be smoothed over. I told him the trust lawyer would be moving to restore all ownership immediately, that the firm they were launching was now exposed, that I was not going to press criminal charges yet. But the documents had already been submitted to the licensing board. Brendan looked tired, older than usual. For the first time, I saw the boy he used to be fade completely. What remained was someone I barely recognized. Someone who had let small compromises grow into a monstrous betrayal. He asked if we could talk again soon. I said maybe, but not here. Not like this. As he left, I watched his reflection in the glass, shrinking with every step. In my lap, I held the manila folder a little longer, then placed it back in my bag. I paid for the table, even though neither of us had ordered anything. That silence had cost enough. Catalina arrived at my apartment the next afternoon. She didn't knock. She used the key Brendan had duplicated years ago when I had hip surgery and needed help with groceries. I had forgotten to change the lock. That would be the last time I made that mistake. She stepped in like she owned the place. She wore that silk blouse she always reserved for negotiations. Her phone gripped like a weapon in her right hand. Her voice was calm, but her eyes flickered the moment she spotted the folders on the table. I was already seated. No tea, no pretense. I had nothing left to offer them in comfort. She said she was surprised by how I had handled things, that everything could have been sorted if I had come to them first. Her tone was flat, too measured. The kind you hear in a lawyer's office, not a family home. I told her the lawyer had advised immediate legal motion, that my name had been illegally removed from documents I never signed. She raised her eyebrows, acting as if she didn't know what I meant. She said they were just trying to prepare for the future, that Brendan had been worried about me living alone, that they were trying to simplify things. I stood up. I walked to the cabinet near the window, opened the drawer, and pulled out the original deed to my condo. The ink had faded, but my signature remained. I placed it on the table beside the trust papers. Catalina glanced down, then back at me. She didn't sit. I told her I had worked double shifts for 18 years straight, that I had missed birthdays, school plays, anniversaries. I had stood for 12-hour shifts with bad knees, emptied bedpans with blistered hands. That this place, this apartment, this quiet sanctuary I had built for myself after retirement was not a gift. It was earned. It was mine. She stayed silent. I reminded her that I had cooked every Thanksgiving even after the stroke, that I had sewn her wedding veil by hand, that I had taken her mother to every chemo appointment when she was too shaken to drive. I said I knew what they had done, and what they had almost gotten away with. I told her there was no way back. I was not going to let my own son and his wife erase me from my life. Catalina's posture shifted. Her calm started to crack. She said they had invested too much in the new business to back down now, that Brendan's name was already on several filings. She called it a misunderstanding, then a miscommunication, then an overstep. I didn't move, I just looked at her. At the eyes that once cried during wedding vows, at the hands that used to hand me tea on quiet Sunday mornings. Nothing in her face resembled the young woman I once called family. I told her the trust had already been restructured, that everything they moved would be reversed, that the lawyer had copies, that this would not go away quietly. She finally spoke with emotion. She said I was ruining Brendan's life. I answered softly. Brendan had ruined it the day he let someone else dictate what I was worth. She turned to leave her heels sharp on the floor, her silence louder than any argument. I waited until the door closed. Then I walked to that same cabinet, took the spare key, and snapped it in two. I wasn't going to be opened again without consent. By the following Monday, the legal team had finished their review. The documents Catalina and Brendan submitted had enough inconsistencies to warrant formal investigation. My lawyer moved swiftly. A notice of revocation was filed invalidating the fraudulent power of attorney. My legal ownership was reinstated across every title and account. Every hidden transfer, every unauthorized change was pulled apart, thread by thread. Brendan's name was removed from the financial trust within 48 hours. Catalina, who had used her married name on several corporate filings, was flagged by the attorneys' network for her involvement. The LLC they created had relied entirely on collateral pulled from my assets. With the trust pulled back and its assets frozen, their budding business collapsed before the first client could sign. It felt surgical, no drama, no confrontation, just clean, sharp facts. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel triumph. I felt a quiet certainty settle in my bones. The kind you feel when you finally shut a door that should have been closed long ago. Later that week, I called my financial advisor and asked to begin the process of establishing a legacy fund. It was something I had considered in passing but never acted on. I wanted it to support retired nurses over 70, especially those living alone with no family left to advocate for them. The process required a few signatures and a meeting with the board. It was the first time in weeks I had worn my good shoes and a touch of lipstick. I walked into that office with my spine straight. No bitterness, just a quiet mission. By Friday, 60% of my assets had been moved into the new fund. The rest I kept for myself. Not because I needed much, but because I finally understood that keeping something for myself wasn't selfish. It was necessary. Brendan called once. I let it ring. I didn't block the number. I just chose silence. Catalina didn't reach out. I assumed she was too busy figuring out how to unwind a dream built on deception. I spent that weekend going through my old notebooks, some still marked with shifts and patient notes from the hospital. I found one dated during flu season 10 years ago. I had scribbled a quote in the margin, something I had heard from a chaplain in the break room. It read, "The opposite of abandonment is not attachment, it is integrity." I closed the book and placed it in the donation pile. I had made my peace. But I wasn't going to carry their shame anymore. I had used the law not to punish, but to protect. I had chosen clarity over chaos, and in doing so, I had restored the only thing that mattered: my name, my story, my voice. The apartment was quiet that morning, not sad, not hollow, just calm. I folded the extra set of keys Brendan had left on my counter years ago and dropped them into a small, padded envelope. Alongside them, I placed the bracelet he gave me when he was 8. It had plastic blue beads that spelled out Mum. He made it in Sunday school. For a long time, I thought I would be buried with it. But that morning, it felt right to let it go. I sealed the envelope and slid it into the mailbox downstairs. In the afternoon light, I took out an old photo from the back of my dresser. It was one of the few I had framed, though it hadn't been displayed for a while. Brendan was about 6 in it arms, wrapped tightly around my neck, his smile missing a front tooth. We were at a fall fair. I had just won him a caramel apple. I sat with the frame in my lap for a long while. Then gently I opened the back and took out the photo. I didn't tear it. I didn't burn it. I simply trimmed it with a pair of scissors, removing only what I needed to: my own face. I placed the cropped photo back into the frame and hung it on the wall near my bookshelf. Now it showed only Brendan standing with his arms reaching into the air. There was a gap next to him, like something had once been there. A shadow. A shape. He stood alone in that picture now, a boy with outstretched arms, reaching for someone who was no longer visible. That was how I wanted to leave it. No rage, no spectacle, just absence, just space. I stepped back and looked at the frame. The quiet in the room felt different now, not empty, just full of everything I had reclaimed: my peace, my place, my story. If this story moved something in you, if it reminded you of someone you once were, or someone you hope to become, stay with me. These stories are more than words. They are pieces of lives often left unheard. If you've ever stood alone in a room full of family or trimmed your presence just to fit in, you are not forgotten. Leave a heart or a word below. Your story matters too.